theme going with our Sunday Showdown. Of course, the big one that we just mentioned, Tua Tagovailoa and Patrick Mahomes are sehr gut. I'm reading it off of here. When it comes to throwing the football, both are top 3 in passing yards this season. Do we expect that fantasy output to continue, Rank?
I would hope so. I know last week it was a very disappointing output for Patrick Mahomes, and we hope that he can go overseas and kind of regain the momentum. But one player that I'm going to focus in on is Rashee Rice, who has kind of emerged as his go-to wide receiver. Now, obviously, Travis Kelce is the top pass catcher. You can also make an argument for Isaiah Pacheco, but Rashee Rice leads all Kansas City wide receivers in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He's the guy they go to near the goal line, so I love this opportunity for him in Germany.
I love me some Rashee Rice. I think you should start him and everyone else that is playing in this game. It is 2 of the most high-powered offenses in the league that are going to be getting pushed by the offense that's on the other side. And you know to start your studs like the quarterbacks, all the wide receivers, Tyreek, Kelce, all those guys. But I even think if you need a deeper sleeper injury or bye week replacement like McKinnon, Savon Ahmed, Kadarius Toney, MVS, those guys are high upside sleepers as well this week.
All right, so I'm not saying you're not starting Raheem Mostert, but I would be a little bit concerned about what his potential output could be this week. He's had fewer than 50 rushing yards in back-to-back games. Miami offense has been way more pass-heavy over the past 2 weeks. Plus, Jeff Wilson is back. He's starting to get more opportunities. And this Kansas City run defense has allowed just 2 rushing touchdowns all season. Now, look, there's always the chance that Mostert could break a big play and find his way into the end zone. But if he doesn't find the painted area, that floor gets really scary low for him. All right, back stateside, we got a big one in the NFC East with the Cowboys and the Eagles. Their defenses rank number 1 and 2 in QB pressure rates. So, Rank, are you worried about playing any of the Philly or Dallas playmakers in this one?
Not even a little bit. As a matter of fact, Dak Prescott, I will have a guarantee about him in a couple of minutes. But let's talk about one of his pass catchers, and I'm looking at Brandon Cooks, who has really started to come on over the last couple of weeks. He's averaged close to 15 fantasy points over the last 2 games. And I understand that the Philadelphia Eagles are one of the top teams in the NFL, but they are very generous to opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers, which means you're obviously starting CeeDee Lamb. But if you need to flex a wide receiver, looking for a wide receiver 3, I really would recommend you start Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, I might have to play him in a league myself this week. I also think you should start Tony Pollard. And I know at the beginning of the year that was super obvious, but I've got a lot of questions this week. Like, what should I do with Tony Pollard? He's not living up to expectations. You see there, second most goal line carries in the NFL. He has not scored a touchdown since week 1. He is a huge regression candidate right now, and I know the Eagles are tough against the run, but I think you have to start Tony Pollard each and every week. And right now, while he's not scoring touchdowns, before he does, is a buy low opportunity.
Yeah, the inefficiency has been strong with Pollard. Hopefully that turns around. Meanwhile, you can stream Jake Ferguson because, look, this is a guy we've been hyping up for the last couple of weeks on this show. He's on the field a ton, running a ton of routes. 5 games with 3 or more receptions, which I know doesn't sound great, but we're talking about tight end. That is enough to sort of get you in the mix for being a low-end tight end 1. Plus, Philadelphia is tied for the second most touchdowns allowed to the position. If you're still looking for help at tight end, Jake Ferguson is available in about 2/3 of NFL.com leagues.
Somebody tried to trade me Kyle Pitts for Jake Ferguson, and I said no.
No.
Also because Younghoe Koo was part of the deal. I'm like, no, dude, I'm keeping Fergie.
Heck yeah. No, hold on to Fergie.
I would take Pitts.
Well,
no shame.
All right, finally, we got, meanwhile, we're going to talk about the Bills and the Bengals. Josh Allen has a banged-up throwing shoulder, but he is expected to play in this one. He's working out at practice this week. Meanwhile, Joe Burrow's starting to look healthy again. That Bengal offense starting to crank up again. Burrow, a passer rating over 110 since week 5. So, Rank, will the Bengals offense be the one serving up the most fantasy points here?
I would think so. I mean, that's the one thing about the Cincinnati Bengals. They never come into a season as everybody's darling, but they finish strong, and we're starting to see that. And one of the big reasons why is they're starting to get the ball to T. Higgins. Over the last couple of weeks, as you've seen the health improve for Joe Burrow, he's now going back to guys like T. Higgins. Now, Jamar Chase was an automatic start. You play him every week. But what I've seen out of T. Higgins recently leads me to believe that he is a must-start once again every week, even though for the early part of the season it wasn't the case. But right now, you got to start him against the Bills.
Yeah, I keep saying try to trade for him before the buy low window slams shut. On the other side, start Dalton Kincaid, 15+ fantasy points in 2 straight. He is the tight end 3 since week 6, and he brings league-winning upside as he could be the second target for Josh Allen and the Bills moving forward, especially this week. They're going to need to put up points because of who is on the other side of them. And the Bengals, they've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends this year. Kincaid is a must-start option this week.
I got to bench him, though.
You're going to bench him?
Yeah.
For Fergie?
No, Kelsey.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Last week I said you could start Joe Mixon against the 49ers. This week I think you can start him against the Buffalo Bills. It's been a big help for him not having Samaje Perine to take a lot of that passing game work. There are no threats to him in this Bengals backfield. But as Cincinnati's offense has gotten better, Mixon has gotten more efficient and more productive as well. Plus, Buffalo has the 26th ranked rush defense over the last 2 weeks, too, giving up a lot of receptions to running backs, 15 catches for 137 yards. So if he doesn't do it on the ground, I think Mixon can do it through the air one way or another. He belongs in your lineup this week. Finally, division leaders in the Seahawks and the Ravens, a bird battle in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense not getting quite the same level of hype as the Chiefs and the Dolphins and some of those other high-powered attacks. Though I do think by the end of this weekend, we'll be talking about him seriously as an MVP candidate. In the meantime, will the Ravens continue to be fantasy heroes?
I would think so. I know that the Seattle Seahawks defense is very tough, but where they're very vulnerable is in the red zone, which is why I like Gus Edwards this week. I was a little bit concerned over a couple of days ago, but he did return to practice fully on Thursday. The toe injury doesn't seem to be a problem. But the one thing about the Seahawks, they've allowed scoring on 73%. I'll split this out. 73% of red zone drives this season. That's the third highest total in the NFL. So when the Ravens get into that red area, I expect them to look for Gus Edwards, and I expect them to have a decent enough game for you this week to make sure you start him.
I would say on the other side, you could beware of DK Metcalf. He claims that he only eats 1 meal a day, but we have not seen him eat as much as usual when he is on the football field. This year, he's been more of a safe floor wide receiver. He has just one game with over 14 fantasy points. So when you're talking about a floor and that's his best value, yeah, that gets lowered when you play the Ravens, who've allowed the fewest passing touchdowns, 3rd fewest passing yards, and 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers this season.
Yeah, plus, isn't one of his meals like a whole bunch of candy or something like that, too? You can start Zay Flowers this week. And Seattle's numbers against wide receivers look good. I am still not convinced, though. You go back through the schedule, right? They had the Browns with P.J. Walker. They had the Cardinals with a slumping Josh Dobbs. They had the Bengals when we still had questions about Joe Burrow's calf. They faced the Giants. They played the Panthers. This might be the best passing attack they have faced since the Lions in week 2. And they got beat up by that Detroit offense. So I think Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, the rest of this Baltimore passing game can have a very good day against the Seattle defense. All right, let's get back to our Sunday showdowns. It's been a bit of a wild week in Vegas. I mean, people in Vegas are certainly no strangers to wild weeks, but maybe not like the one that the Raiders are going through. They fire their GM, their head coach, they get rid of their offensive coordinator. They have a change at quarterback as well. So does this mean an upswing in fantasy points, Rank?
I would hope so, and I still feel very confident starting Devontae Adams, even with Aiden O'Connell as the starting quarterback. I think that when you have these younger players, they tend to look at their superstars out there, and if I'm Aiden O'Connell, I'm going to Devontae Adams, so I would start him with full confidence.
Yeah, just like that, I would start Josh Jacobs with full confidence. He had 11 targets in his one game with O'Connell. The Giants are top 5 in yards, touchdowns, and explosive run plays allowed to running backs. And if you've seen anything coming from the Raiders locker room this week, Devontae Adams playing basketball in there and everything, they just look rejuvenated right now. So I'm excited to start them.
Well, while you guys are confident to start those two, I'm not quite as confident about Jacoby Myers because when O'Connell started in week 4, I think he had 39 pass attempts. 24 of them went to Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs. Meanwhile, so far this season, O'Connell has targeted Myers just 6 times. Compare that to 7 targets to Hunter Renfrow, who's barely been involved in the Raider offense so far this season. So I would say if you've got Jacoby Myers, maybe just hold him out of your lineup this week. See how things go before you decide to plug him back in. I just want to make sure they get it to somebody other than just Adams and Jacobs in that offense. The Commanders also stirred up the pot, trading away 2 defensive stars. Can the Patriots capitalize against the struggling defense, Rank?
I would think so. You know, I would, if you need to stream a quarterback, I think Mac Jones is somebody that you should look at because since week 2, the Commanders have allowed a top 10 quarterback in every single one of those games.
That's a fact.
That's a fact right there. So the hype train will be pulling up for Mac Jones. Again, streaming option. You don't have to like it, but I think if you're playing the matchups, that's who I would go with.
I do like Mac as a streaming option. On the other side, I think Sam Howell is just a quarterback that you start right now. QB1 last week gave you over 31 fantasy points, at least 18 in 5 of his last 7, and he's top 21 3 times. The floor might not be the safest, but the upside is clearly there. And the Patriots, they don't get a bunch of sacks or turnovers as is, so that's just another reason to feel good about getting Sam Howell in your lineup this week.
I feel okay about getting Hunter Henry in the lineup as a sleeper this week. He's fallen off since about week 4, but that was about the time Kendrick Bourne started to pick some things up. So now with Bourne on IR, you wonder, does the page turn back to Hunter Henry? Plus, look, I know it's a little bit deeper at tight end here, but you've got Kittle, Ingram, Laporta on a bye. Darren Waller is hurt. Chances are you are going to be hurting at the position, looking for some help, and Hunter Henry is potentially there for you. Bears and Saints. Saints scored 38 points and had over 500 yards of offense last week. Rank, do you buy that the Saints offense has found its rhythm?
I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that Chris Olave is somebody that I would be able to start with confidence. He had 2 balls last week that really should have been caught, really should have been touchdowns. And I think that when you have a veteran presence like Derek Carr in that locker room, he understands that. And he understands that he needs to get him going for this Saints offense to be effective. So I expect Chris Olave to be heavily targeted in this game.
I think his teammate Alvin Kamara is a must-start option, and I know you know to start him, but this could be a week where he goes nuclear and finishes as the overall RB1. He missed 3 games and still leads running backs in targets and catches, and the Bears have allowed the most receiving yards and touchdowns and 3rd most catches to the position. Yeah, he's going to eat plenty this week.
I think you can start the Saints defense another week without Justin Fields in the Bears offense. New Orleans doesn't blitz a ton, but they do pick on quarterbacks they think can be interception prone. And we saw that putting some pressure on Tyson Bagent last week caused him to throw some interceptions. So I think the Saints really do try to get after the young quarterback this week. Finally, sadly, right as Kirk Cousins was getting the Vikings to go all in on Creed, he suffers an Achilles injury, which, look, if they go out and win, maybe he says that's my sacrifice. In the meantime, Rank, will Jaron Hall be able to find his wide receivers with arms wide open against this Atlanta defense?
The world is heading for mutiny, and all we want is muted. What's the world is heading for? Anyways, start Jordan Addison. I'm sorry. I thought I was more familiar with the Creed catalog. I was going to do the arms wide open thing. But I still feel very confident in this player. Once again, young quarterbacks look for the really good wide receivers. I think Kevin O'Connell's done a great job of scheming them up. So I start Jordan Addison.
I can't tell you any Creed songs with any sort of confidence, but I can with confidence say to sit Alexander Madison.
That's what they want.
He has not topped 50 yards in a month. Cam Akers is eating into his workload. The Falcons are very stingy to running backs. Stay far, far away from Alexander Madison, like Russell Westbrook type far when LeBron James is on the court shaking hands with the other team.
Wow, that's pretty far away. I like Mac Hollins as a deep sleeper. Look, it's really simple. Drake London has been ruled out for this week. Taylor Heineke is at quarterback. We know he likes to throw it deep. Look, he might just say, F it. Mac is down there somewhere. Minnesota giving up the 6th most receiving yards on throws of 20-plus air yards. Maybe more of a DFS play than, say, in a season-long lineup, but worth throwing Mac Hollins into a lineup somewhere.
I think you should be starting Nico Collins in this one, and I'm pretty much going to say this each and every week, but especially this week. The Bucs run zone coverage 78% of the time. That is the 8th highest in the NFL. Nico Collins has more than double the amount of anyone else on the Texans in yards against zone coverage. Plus, they've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to receivers in the last month. This could be a big, big day for Nico and co.
We've mentioned a lot of quarterbacks on the show today, and I'm sure people are like, yeah, he's gone. Hey, what about Baker Mayfield? And there, you know what? Another guy who could be a potential sleeper for you or streamer this week. He's had at least 16 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. The most incredible thing to me, he's attempted 42 passes in each of the last 2 games, or at least 42 passes. It's been it's incredible that Baker's throwing this much. He also loves throwing the ball to Mike Evans, so I think there's a good opportunity this week for Baker May.
Well, and you can start Rachaad White because in part of those increased pass attempts for Baker Mayfield, a lot of them are short throws because they can't run the football. So that short passing game has sort of become an extension of the running game. Mayfield top 8 among quarterbacks and targeting running backs the last 2 weeks. And here's the thing about Rachaad White. He's had a 16% target share in the last 2 games, but -8 air yards. They're just dumping it off to him and letting him do the work. Meanwhile, the Texans giving up 7 yards per attempt to running backs, second highest total in the NFL. Let's talk some Cardinals and Browns. Deshaun Watson is going to be the starter for Cleveland. So, Florio, does that change how you're feeling about anything there?
Hopefully you don't have to rely on a lot of your Browns this week. I do think in this game, though, Trey McBride must start fantasy tight end. Last week, you see that 10 catches, the most by a tight end in Cardinals history. It was his first game as the Cardinals starting tight end without Zach Ertz there. And that's the thing. Ertz was heavily involved, and now McBride is a 32% target share for Cardinals tight ends this year. That is the second highest in the league. I don't care if it's Clayton Tune or Kyler Murray or whoever. There's too much volume to get away at the weakest position in fantasy.
Trey McBride was on the hype train a couple of weeks ago. Another player who a few weeks ago was on the hype train, Jerome Ford, who's been pretty solid over the last couple of weeks. As you see right there, the totals on the board are correct. At least 90 scrimmage yards in 2 out of his last 3 games. This is a good opportunity. When you have a quarterback returning who's battling through some injuries, I expect the Cleveland Browns to attack the Cardinals, on the ground. As a matter of fact, I'll have a crazy prediction about this one coming up, but you're going to have to stick around for that one.
That's called a tease, folks. I will say I'm worried about Marquise Brown this week. The Browns giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. I think if you are Cleveland, your goal is to take away Marquise Brown and make the Cardinals go somewhere else. He's got fewer than 50 receiving yards in 3 straight games. Jonathan Gannon is still being coy about who's going to be their quarterback. So, look, if it's Kyler Murray for some reason, maybe I consider Brown as a flex. If it's Clayton Tune, very worried about what might be for Marquise Brown. Time now for Seize the Day, presented by Caesar Sportsbook and Casino. Going to talk about the Monday night game. The Chargers, they have a top 10 offense, but they can't finish off games, which seems to be a Charger hallmark. Meanwhile, the Jets without Aaron Rodgers have won 3 in a row. What's the formula to this offense's winning ways, Florio?
It is Breece Hall, and I know he's low-hanging fruit, but I was last to the homework, and you guys got the guys that the deeper guys that I would like to talk about here. So, Breece Hall, over 23 fantasy points per game in the last month, and here's why I'm especially excited. Season-high 9 targets last week. The Chargers have allowed the 4th most catches to running backs, and he is a threat to go the distance anytime he touches the ball. Breece Hall went from a snap count to an absolute must-start RB1 pretty much overnight.
If you're looking for a deep sleeper, I'd say Donald Parham, who all he does is catch touchdown passes like he did Sunday night against the Chicago Bears. Now he's going up against a Jets team that has a very good defense. There is no denying that, but the vulnerability is at the tight end position. The Jets have allowed the most touchdowns to tight ends this season, so I love Parham this week.
I really do like Donald Parham this week, too, as a deep sleeper. I think you can start Garrett Wilson. I think you should start Garrett Wilson. Over the last couple of weeks, it's like he and Zach Wilson seem to be vibing. 15 catches, 190 yards. That's on 25 targets over the past 2 games. Double-digit targets for Wilson in 3 of the last 4 games, going against a Chargers secondary, giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So according to our friends at Caesar Sportsbook, here are the odds for who will score the first touchdown in that matchup. Austin Eckler, no surprise, near the top of that board, followed by Breece Hall. And you got Keenan Allen, Garrett Wilson, and Joshua Kelly sneaking in there in the top 5.